So, I'm a big fan of the video game known as Super Mario 64. I like it for a lot of reasons. I think it's very fun to play and is very important to game history, but the main thing I like about it is its aesthetic. A lot of people say this game is ugly or hasn't aged well, and I can 100% understand why one would think that. But to me, there's just something indescribable about the way this game looks and feels. About the way things in general looked and felt during the infancy of 3D gaming that really strongly resonates with me. And I know I'm not alone in that, given the 10,000 YouTube videos that exist talking about how Mario 64 is an atmospheric masterpiece. And something that frequently gets brought up in these videos, something that's of particular interest to me as well, is how that atmosphere can be unsettling. When I say that, I don't mean like, "Oh, I'm so scared of the ghost piano. Oh, the eel is so scary. This game should be rated AO." No, I'm talking about more subtle things. These little lonely moments wandering around Peach's castle, or the odd vibe in levels like Hazy Maze Cave and Wet Dry World, or when you look up at the blurry skybox and wonder, where am I? It's hard to articulate, and maybe you understand it and maybe you don't. But regardless, Mario 64 has this very specific feeling to it. And I would extend that to this generation of games more broadly. That being the early 3D, low-polygon games of the mid to late 90s and very early 2000s that came out on the Nintendo 64, PlayStation 1, and other contemporary platforms. And recently, we've seen more and more people try to recapture the feeling that games of this era had. Retro-styled aesthetics are certainly nothing new. But this look specifically definitely seems to have gotten more popular in recent years, and it seems like a lot of these projects want to capture that eerie feeling, to use this aesthetic to create something scary. And so, on this very spooky Halloween night, or whenever you're watching this, let's take a look at some of my favorite examples of the retro 3D aesthetic in video game horror. Crow Country is a game released earlier this year which I saw a few months ago on the Steam store and purchased on a whim. I knew as soon as I saw it that I was almost destined to love this game just because of how it looked. I absolutely adore the art direction and what it was going for. You play as a detective investigating a missing persons case in an abandoned theme park, which you soon discover is overrun with horrific monsters. The game wears its influences on its sleeve, being a very clear love letter to the pioneering survival horror games of the PS1 such as Resident Evil and Silent Hill. And it does a great job of capturing the feeling of those games while also maintaining its own distinct voice. This game is just oozing with atmosphere. A big part of that is the amazing soundtrack which you're listening to right now, but the graphics pull equal weight in really drawing you into its world. There were so many times playing this game where I just had to stop and take in just how much I appreciated what I was seeing. An interesting choice in the art direction was that despite the aforementioned survival horror influence, the character designs are a lot more cartoony than most games of that genre. I've heard comparisons to Final Fantasy VII. Personally, I think they look a lot like Lego Duplo figurines. And I think this is to the game's benefit. In the late 90s, this was the best artists could do at depicting a realistic human on this hardware. But with how far technology has come, it's obviously not going to read that way nowadays. So I think it's wise for projects going for a retro look to lean into the stylization rather than trying to capture the look of something real. And from a horror perspective, I think taking these stylized, even cute characters and putting them into this terrifying environment is a pretty effective juxtaposition. Speaking of terrifying, these monster designs are something else. My god. Some of these seriously shook me in a way that I like to think is pretty hard for a piece of media to do, and really stuck with me after the fact. They did a fantastic job of making creatures that are imaginative, creepy, and, like the rest of the game, utilize the low-poly aesthetic beautifully. It's abundantly clear that the creators of this game had a lot of love for what they were making. and put immense care into every detail as they brought this aesthetic to life and made it their own. Another retro 3D style horror game that I really appreciated was No One Lives Under the Lighthouse. Like Crow Country, this evokes a PS1 look, but also draws clear influence from PC adventure games and first-person shooters. The premise is that you are a lighthouse keeper alone on a small island. Your employer will send you an assistant in a week, but until then, you have to do your job alone tending to this lighthouse, which definitely does not have a horrific eldritch abomination living under it. This game really leans into that feeling of loneliness. It's a bit of a slow burn when it comes to introducing the more overtly scary elements, so a good chunk of the game is spent just walking around this environment in isolation, doing various mundane tasks, all with the looming feeling that something isn't quite right. It doesn't take long to get a little paranoid playing this game. What was that banging noise? What's that in the distance? Is there someone in that window? The source of anxiety shifts away from the fact that you're alone on this island to the fear that you might not be. And I think the low-quality models and textures do a lot to enhance this. There's a lot of talk about the uncanny valley, how trying to make things, particularly faces, excessively lifelike makes them look more unsettling because they're so close to reality, but just slightly off. But I think a low-poly aesthetic can also be effective in creating a different kind of uncanniness. We understand what these graphics are depicting, but they're not quite the way we know them, and when presented in the right context, that can be a very unnerving thing. As the game progresses, the horror elements become more and more explicit. I don't want to spoil it for anyone who hasn't played the game themselves, but influences from the film The Lighthouse, as well as Lovecraftian horror more broadly, are very apparent. And I think that's also really interesting, to see the game take elements from other works of horror and reimagine them in this low-poly retro style. A recurring thought when playing both Crow Country and No One Lives Under the Lighthouse was, how would these games be different if you gave them a more conventional, high-end, modern graphical style? And I personally think a lot would be lost. The way these games look is very deliberate. It's not incidental, it's a fundamental aspect of the visual design. And if you strip that away, you would be robbing the game of the unique aesthetic and atmosphere that that look creates. The last game I'd like to talk about in this video is not actually a game at all. If you aren't already familiar with Petscop, I first of all strongly urge you to check it out. It's seriously one of my favorite things to come out of the internet in the last decade. To give a quick recap though, it's a YouTube series that ran from 2017 to 2019 that takes the form of fictitious Let's Plays of a fictitious PlayStation game called Petscop. It seems to be an innocent, though unfinished, family-friendly puzzle game, with an art style reminiscent of Parappa the Rapper or Paper Mario. But when the player inputs a secret code, he discovers an expansive underworld filled with odd and creepy things that are concerningly out of place in a game like this. And the player is left to explore this world and discover just how much this game is hiding. I won't say too much about the story because, again, I strongly suggest that you watch this on your own. No summary or commentary about Petscop can serve as a substitute for experiencing the series for yourself. The creator of Petscop, Domenico, did an incredible job at authentically replicating the look and feel of a classic PS1 kids game. Not just the obvious things like the resolution and polygon count, but smaller details like the way sprites move, the menu buttons, the sound effects. And equally impressive is how Domenico takes elements from these classic non-horror games and recontextualizes them to create something scary. One of Petscop's most admirable qualities is its subtlety. There's not a single jump scare in Petscop. There's no gore, and not even really any overtly frightening imagery. But through its expertly crafted atmosphere, the series is able to create some of the most genuinely unsettling and memorable moments I've seen in horror media. Petscop kind of sparked a wave of content creators creating fake games to show off in a spooky web series, in a genre that's been dubbed This Game I Found, as part of the larger category of unfiction. And a lot of these games, definitely most of the ones I've seen, use the same early 3D style. There's no doubt about it. Something about this look in particular captivates people who are trying to create something scary. It's a mix of nostalgia and uneasiness, hazy, half-forgotten dreams from years gone by being twisted into nightmares. I don't think I've seen anything that has fully surpassed Petscop in my eyes, but that's in no way a slight to these other projects. There's a ton that I find super captivating and impressive, and creative people making cool, interesting things that they're passionate about is just the best thing ever. I've heard it argued that 3D games from the late 90s are the ones that would benefit most from being remade, as if you take off the nostalgia glasses, the graphics are objectively very badly aged. But I just can't agree with that. I don't have any nostalgia glasses. I wasn't alive when most of these games came out. But still, even though they've been quote-unquote outdated for my whole life, there's always been something about them that speaks to me. Like I said at the beginning, I fully understand if it doesn't do that for you and this whole video made no sense. Art is subjective like that, but I know it made sense to me. And given everyone who has been inspired by these old games and utilized the style in their own projects, I'm clearly not the only one. When I look at most remakes for games of this era, I can't help but feel like they've kinda missed the point. Yes, the graphics are more technically impressive, but all the charm and uniqueness of the original game's art style is completely gone. I don't at all mean to disparage these remakes or the artists that worked on them. I just think treating this style as if it's something inherently obsolete that must be updated, rather than its own unique and valid aesthetic, is a real shame. And that's why I'm so glad to see so many indie game developers, internet content creators, and other artists have embraced this style, and done new and interesting things with it. I focused on horror projects today because it's spooky season and it's a particular interest of mine, but it's in no way limited to just that. And by the way, if there's any games, web series, or anything else that uses this style that you think I should have mentioned here, please let me know in the comments. This isn't just like engagement bait or whatever, I mean, it kinda is that, but I genuinely really want to know because I love this style and I want to see more of it. But anyway, thanks for watching. I was really happy to see the positive response my last video got, so I hope you enjoyed this one too. I have big plans for this channel, so stick around if you want to see more. But until then, please like and subscribe, love you so much, happy Halloween, and goodbye.